stop. In the last session, we had looked at association, and one of the key things about association he had mentioned was that it has agency. And agency obviously comes through the structure of an association. So it has a hierarchy and chain of authority. So that's why, even though it is a collectivity, people are able to make decisions. So that's why he gave association and agency. But society for him, on the other hand, is not an association because it doesn't have agency. Society doesn't have agency. So he gives the example of California, which is a society, but it doesn't have so the current society is not an association because it doesn't have agency. So that might be a characteristic of modern societies, which are individualistic. But he says that California is a polity. So as a polity, it is an association. And as a political association, that is a state, it has an agency. So that's the basic distinction between society and association for him, that society doesn't have an agency. So that's why society cannot be political society cannot be called a state, but political association can be called an state, a state. But what are the characteristics of society for him? And one way to distinguish society from another is what he called laws and jurisdiction. But people can move from one jurisdiction to another. So a society which exists when there is some established set of customs. A society could be said to exist, set of customs or conventions or legal arrangement. So they specify how laws apply to person, whether they stay put or move from one jurisdiction to another. So society has to people belong to a set of customs, conventions, and some legal some laws. So he mentioned geography and the closeness of people living together, ruled by shared customs, conventions, but then he said that it not always necessarily geography is not always sufficient to establish or distinguish one society from another. For Highland people, for example, of New Guinea, they lived in another, though there was there was not much of a society among different Highland people. Even they lived close to each other in one single geographical proximity. But since they didn't have much interactions, according to him, they were not a society. Though there was a society in medieval Spain when Jews, Muslims, Christians coexisted under elaborate legal arrangements specifying rights and duties, had within their own communities as outsider when in others. So there's sort of a Spanish society, and then within it Muslim society, Christian society, and Jewish society. So I think for him, customs, convention, and legal jurisdictions are key to a society, although living together, closeness is also, and societies can overlap as well, according to him. But obviously these customs laws are of non-stateful nature because societies are not states as far as he is concerned. Okay, the last thing, I think more substantial things he has said are about community, so we'll finish on that one. So community for him is based on, I think one important thing for community is common interests, but I think more like shared understanding, from which the notion of common interests also thrive. So for him, society is too broad to have shared interests, but if you have shared laws and customs and jurisdiction, there should be some understanding of some shared understanding, obviously. But for him, community is more intimate. And at the core of this shared understanding, he said, is the distinction between what are the public concerns and what are private concerns. Although he mentioned that, so the distinction between public and private, what are public matters and private matters, comes from this shared understanding. Although he mentions two authors, one who says that blood kinship is key to community, and common locality for another one. This is going to allow for the possible communities that cross geographical boundaries. That is one. That's it. While it makes perfect sense to talk of a village or neighborhood, it makes no sense to talk about, say, the university community or scholarly community or the religious community, according to those authors. But in his understanding, you can talk about. But generally, community is something more specific and more intimate. So, and then he went on to mention John Rawls, especially his later political writings, political liberalism related writings, because he claims that state is not a community. Although for our author, it seems like he's moving towards concept of political community, state as a political community, and association, I guess. So, but we'll take his discussion of Rawls, which we had just started. We'll look at it in the next session. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.